I'm becoming an approver. Yay! This is fun. We should do it twice every time. Awesome. Thank you very much. Lowering my bus factor makes me very happy. But that is great. Sweet. Cool. Next thing. Okay. The question I had was, Robert, where did we end up on Prow?
Yeah. So at the last meeting, we discussed Prow, and I said we'd give it like a week or so for people to raise any objections in the issue. No objections have come up, but I have not yet had a chance to like actually write up here's the plan of how we're going to switch. So
got it.
That should be incoming soon. This meeting popped up on my calendar. I was like, oh my gosh, it's already been a month. I should make more progress than that in a month, although other things have been distracting. So yes, that's still coming. Relative to other things for 1.0, I'm not sure it's actually the most important thing to work on. So I think it's more of like maybe more of a background task.
Cool. I was curious. The other one I wanted to talk about, and April, go ahead.
I was gonna say before we get like really into the agenda, is there anybody that's new on the call that wants to say hi?
I'm new to the call. My name is Carl Von Schilling with Dido.
Nice, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hello, Cyril.
Okay. Cyril's here, yay. So great to have everybody. That's the other thing we can say. Everybody that showed up today, you get an Agones t-shirt.
Really?
Yeah.
How are we doing that? Are we shipping t-shirts?
We will. So I'll put a link in the chat and in the working docs as well. You can submit your address and everybody gets a t-shirt as a thank you for being here and being part of the community.
Woohoo.
Okay, that's the general stuff I have. You can get back to the detailed technical stuff, Mark.
No, that's fine. T-shirts are important, like super important. T-shirts are how you know you have a real product. All right, so Kubernetes version compatibility. I know there's been some backwards and forwards on this. So I wrote a message a little about 14 minutes ago about, I feel like there's kind of two layers to this. One, which is like, which version of client Go do we use? It seems like that doesn't seem to matter too much because we're entirely using stable APIs. So I don't think that's likely to change anytime soon. And then it comes down to like, what version of Kubernetes do we do most of our development against? Like basically as if we start developing against 1.12 and people are using 1.11, then we don't actually like have much confidence that, or we don't really know whether our stability on 1.11 is actually good or not. Do we need multiple test clusters with different versions? I don't know how to solve this problem. What do people think?
I've just got a quick question about that. If we were to use a version of Kubernetes ahead of the version used for Agones, is that likely to cause problems, or should we be fine?
So in theory, it should be fine, but it becomes the same problem, right? Like we haven't tested it. So if we haven't done end-to-end tests, we haven't done performance tests, there's no way to know for absolute sure. So again, same problem, right? Like the API services that we're touching with this, so they should be fine. I don't know, Robert, you just came off mute, so I assume you have thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I was going to try to let other people jump in first. I think to answer your question, Steve, the answer is it depends on how much testing resources we want to put in on our side, right? Like if we want to say we will qualify a single version of Kubernetes, other versions may work, but use at your own risk. Then that's sort of I think the least amount of resources we could put in. If we want to put in more, we could qualify multiple versions of Kubernetes. And it's really just a question of like how many testing resources, how much time do people have to triage failures, et cetera, that we can do like as a product, as a community. I think sort of the straw man of let's pick one version and start with that seems really good. Like Mark said, it should work sort of forwards and backwards, at least one version without any trouble, because that's sort of the general guarantee from Kubernetes in terms of the client libraries. But if you look at like their actual compatibility matrix, like features we're using are basically completely forwards and backwards compatible across many versions. And so we would expect things to work well, but there have historically been different sorts of issues that come up with every Kubernetes release, right? Stuff that gets past their end-to-end testing, gets past human review, gets sort of sneaks in, and sometimes there's like a security problem where things are broken on purpose, right? And so I think the guarantee, so the guaranteed Kubernetes version Mark was talking about would be like, we have tested this one, we know it works, and other ones are likely to work, but they're a little bit more use at your own risk. And if we think that's not sufficient, we can guarantee multiple versions, right? It's just more work and overhead for the project. And so if that's something that's really important for people for adoption, then we may end up having to go there. I think it'd be nice to start with one as we get off the ground.
Yeah, I think one's fine. We've got no desire to be sort of bleeding edge on Kubernetes, and if we know, it's fine with this version, then we can just stick to that one.
Yeah, I think to that point as well, and I brought it up in Ticket, where I was like, maybe we should, if we're going to pick one, maybe we pick like N-1 of whatever is like supported across all the cloud providers. So we're not bleeding edge, but we're still kind of rolling forward.
Yeah, the thing I mentioned on Ticket, like that over time is likely to be less useful, right? Because like the cloud providers, the N version is like getting slower from adopting bleeding edge of Kubernetes, right? So I think we're likely at some point, if we continue that pattern, to be like a couple of releases behind sort of the newest release of Kubernetes.
Yep.
Like maybe 2 or 3, which starts to get a little dicey in terms of upstream Kubernetes support if we do find upstream bugs and the time it takes for those to get fixed and plumbed back. Like I was just reading through an issue yesterday where there was a bug that like we're carrying a patch in our vendor directory for.
Yeah.
I think you commented about it in December. And if we end up like 3 versions behind Kubernetes, we're carrying patches for 9 to 12 months, right?
Yeah,
and that kind of sucks. So I think like if we can identify this is when we think something is stable, right? Like I think you're basically, that's what your heuristic is, like when do we think it's like stable and most people will be comfortable using it? I think your heuristic for now is probably fine, but over time we might need to adjust it.
Okay, that seems reasonable. I mean, we could always just say like once. Yeah, I always feel like at the very least it needs to be adopted across the 3 major cloud providers. So like I think 113 isn't quite there yet from memory from last time I looked, which is why I was always like, okay, maybe 112. And then, but yeah, like as soon as it hits, it seems like a bad time to do our shift. But yeah, no, I hear your point. It definitely has been getting slower.
Right. So like 114 is out and like not on cloud providers. 113 has been out for a while, but it's not on all cloud providers. So 112 is super safe, but then like head of Kubernetes is they're building 115 next, right? So we're already starting to see like a 3 version skew, and like that's about how far back they're usually willing to backport security fixes and so forth, right?
Yep. Back in my day, we got new Kubernetes version in about a week.
So yeah, I think like right now we should probably be targeting 112. I think it's probably the right answer there.
All right. I'm gonna put a note in here. All right, just so that. All right. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? I mean, I'll put in. Seems like general consensus is to target 1.12 or N-1. We'll make a comment on the ticket and confirm consensus there. I can't spell consensus apparently, but that's okay. Any major objections for anyone? I believe also there's some really nice scheduling improvements in 112 that should help with that performance too. So I'll be curious to see what that is. Sweet. We can do that. Cool. Jarek, you had some fun things you want to talk about. There goes my dog.
Yeah, so we were playing with Agones on a slightly more advanced level recently here, and we discovered that the default installation only really works if you're trying to create fleets in the default namespace, right? And that could be how most people are using Agones these days. So that's basically my question. So the problem if you're trying to use a non-default namespace is that there's no service account in that namespace that can talk back to Agones. So like Agones launches those game server pods and they cannot really participate in the protocol. So have people encountered this? Like, is this a problem? Do we need to support more than one namespace per installation of Agones? Any thoughts on that?
So in the Helm install, you can provide a list of namespaces you want to support, but it only happens at install time.
But we install only one service account. as far as
no, it loops. It'll loop. So if you pass multiple namespaces in, it'll create a service account per namespace for the namespaces you've specified.
Because it seems to me that it would make more sense if we just supported any namespace without having to kind of pre-declare it. And that unfortunately would require changing how the SDK sidecar works to kind of get rid of the dependency on those service accounts. And there are ways around it, but I'm sort of curious whether people see the need to support more than one namespace per cluster. Maybe there's no need, so maybe we don't need to do anything here. But thoughts? All right, so I'll file an issue if you guys have any opinions on that. Please comment on this. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful to gather any use cases people have, because it's basically, the idea would be like you could run a set of fleets in namespace A and a set of fleets in namespace B, which might actually be really useful for separation, right?
Like maybe there will be a broader question. Are people trying to run more than one game in a single cluster ever? Have you guys encountered that? We try that. Is this a use case that is interesting?
So for our case, we have 3 different game modes that we run in a cluster, but we're just using the default namespace for everything.
Okay. And are you using that Kubernetes cluster for anything else, or is it just for Agones?
No, we just put everything in the one cluster. So our kind of API server as well, matchmaker, everything.
Oh, I see. Okay. Great.
And I could see as well having multiple deployments if you want to support multiple tenants.
Can you speak up? It's really quiet.
Yep. If you want to, like, for example, provide a game server as a service for your productions, for us, I mean, I could see multiple installation of Agones in different namespaces. I could see it. I haven't seen it yet, but I could see it.
Okay, so did you mean installations of Agones itself, like have a separate copy of Agones for each customer, one maybe at different versions even? Or are you talking about like having fleets in different namespaces?
Fleets in different namespaces.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, because the former I think is not really possible with how Kubernetes works.
Yep. Actually, that's an interesting question, Jarek. We had this conversation the other day. Like, Eric, would you let me see if I can think this through. Would you want to be able to basically dynamically add game servers to basically any arbitrary namespace, if that makes sense, rather than have to go back to and create a service? Like if you were like, yeah, wow, this makes my head hurt. Basically, right now you have to define your namespaces at install time.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be happier if you were just like, the admin does the installation and they know what, like, they're just like, it's fine, and then when the user comes to use it, they're able to just pick any namespace they want to put it in, or you control that somehow and you don't have to care about creating service accounts or anything like that? If that makes sense.
I'm okay with predefining namespaces, to be honest. So
okay.
The use case we have right now is working for us. I just don't want to lose it.
Yeah, so because we ran into this issue, we basically tried creating GUID namespaces, for isolation, and that just ended up, throwing it back at us. And like GUIDs, you cannot obviously pre-declare at helm time ever, right? So yeah. Anyway, I'll file an issue. Please comment on it if you have other thoughts.
Sweet.
The documentation says you can run a Helm upgrade to add additional namespaces after the fact. So you don't have to necessarily pre-install them. And presumably that's just Helm going through and like recreating new service accounts, right? So if you have the ability to create service accounts later, you should be able to use new namespaces.
Yeah, I think it's just a question of whether or not, should it require an admin task to add a namespace, or should it be easy, quote unquote? Pros and cons. Cool. All right. Me again. Wow. Cool. Actually, Robert added this, so maybe it's Robbie's. What was the word? So I sat down and started poking at the allocation stuff, which had recent improvements for throughput. And Ilker, who's not here, unfortunately, made some really great strides in this. But what I realized is the packed algorithm, so trying to keep everything tight for on the cloud environment, is not as good as it used to be, not by a large margin. So we end up with a bit of the Swiss cheese effect happening with the latest version, but we get much higher throughput through. So like pros and cons. I had some ideas on potentially being able to basically pre-cache a sorted list of game servers that people could be able to use, because I figured that allocations aren't going to change that often, and then we could atomically pop off from there, and so we don't get the contention where you get multiple game servers trying to be allocated at the same time, which slows things down. This is my theory. I don't know if it's going to work. That's sort of the issue. And the big issue there as well is, just so that's 100% clear, is like if you're in a cloud environment and you're spreading out your allocated game servers across multiple nodes, that makes it really hard to scale down, and you're paying for a lot of resources that you can't use.
So your theory is that in any game server cluster, there is basically only a small number of allocation kinds, right?
That's
it's
my
not that there is a
theory.
random one for each allocation.
Yeah.
You're always submitting the same events, the same requests over and over again. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I think if that's different for some people, then we could probably handle that as maybe as a separate use case. Like if we see that there's only like 5 game servers that come out, then we're like, oh, we handle that specially. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've been doing is, yeah. So as it comes in, I create a list of game servers preferred, and a list. Basically, it's a sorted set of game servers preferred, and a sorted set for what's required. And then basically you can just come in and be like, okay, is there one? If not, populate it. Cool. And then when you go to allocate, you can just pop one off the list atomically, and then you'll never get the contention between multiple things trying to get the same one. And then probably what I would end up doing is about maybe every 30 seconds is an arbitrary number, go back and just resync it every so often. So it kind of becomes eventually consistent in terms of the ordering. And I think that's probably good enough too. And then the two concerns I have with that, which I wrote up in the ticket too, is one, if you had overlapping game server allocations, like they're both applying themselves to the same fleets or something like that, so you have 2 different caches. Or by the time we do allocations and we want to split it between multiple pods. But what I think we could actually do there is add a little bit of jitter to the sorting. So they'll be in slightly different orders on each of the caches, and then they'll eventually consistently come back to each other. And so you shouldn't get as much contention. We can even just play with how much jitter to add for the sorting. That's my theory, but I'll do that's like a second round type idea.
Do you really need to pre-cache it all for any amount of time? Like, is it costly to recompute the sets on every request?
So the concern I had, so it was more actually about concurrent requests on the same allocation type asking for exactly the same game server each time. That was my concern. And so if we sort it every time, which is cool and that's fine, there's nothing to say that you're gonna always get the same one, or like one within the set of the node. And so you could potentially be colliding a lot and having a lot of retries, especially at high throughput, as you get that allocation retry. That was my concern.
That is true, but if you sort like all of them and basically randomize across the first 10 or something.
So we technically, yeah, we could do that. Like right now we're randomizing across 100, and that's not great. And I don't think
maybe that's what's causing the issue, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if the sorting is very good either right now. I have a feeling I don't think we actually sort right now. Actually, I think we
So if you sort by node name or something like that, that's pretty stable.
We actually have pre-cached the count. We keep a running cache of the count amounts per node of ready and allocated. So that's actually already pre-calculated. So we can use that for sorting. That's already there. We don't have to worry about it too much.
So the original bug was talking about using batching, basically, right? So batching completely eliminates contention. You basically have all the requests that have come to the server at the same time. They all kind of sit together and say, okay, we all want those 15 servers. You take this one, you take this one, you take this one.
Yeah.
And, right? So that could be much more efficient, and you will be perfectly packed.
I think maybe that's a better idea.
Right.
How do you? That's just an interesting question. So how do you batch that? Do you just intercept the incoming request?
So you have all the requests, and you basically have every request goes into some kind of queue, and there's an executor that only runs everything from the queue and sends back to whoever's listening.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And there's some very simple techniques. Like you can basically say, is anybody already running this request? No, run it. And basically everybody who sees that there is already an executor waits for this guy to complete. And they just like, it builds up a batch and the next guy gets the whole thing. Right?
And we could use like a go queue for it. Sorry, go ahead.
With the lock mechanism that we had before, isn't it similar to that? Because everyone needed to wait for the lock and then.
But the lock was for like a global lock that completely killed the throughput. Here we are not killing the throughput because we are still doing a lot of work at once under a single lock.
Yeah, so we could do like a buffered queue of like 1,000 items, say, for example, and so like 1,000 items come in, and then it would stop, and then we'd process the 1,000, and then sort of we could.
I think for pack it works fine, but for distribution we can do better because.
For distribution, you can do absolutely better. For distribution, random selection is actually much safer.
Yeah, you might as well just do it randomly. Yeah,
except for small populations, because then it's also going to cause contentious.
That is true. Wow, I did a whole bunch of work for the other thing, but I like this idea a whole lot better, actually. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna throw away my work. It was fun though. That's cool. That's why we have these conversations.
Sorry.
No. That's good. It's good. Better to have the simpler solution than what I had before. Or maybe I can reuse it. That's fine too. Awesome. I really like that idea. What was I going to say? No, yeah, that was what I was going to ask. When we split the allocation system into multiple pods, does that become an issue that will get contention between the pods as each one gets a different request as we're batching?
So you will, but then you have to do some kind of sharding.
Okay.
You basically say that pod number 1 only prefers, things with some random identifier modulo of port equal to 1 or something like that.
That makes sense.
And this requires some tuning, but
we can
again, for large populations, it just works beautifully. For smaller populations, it can get tricky.
Okay. All right. I will go play. Yeah. That sounds like fun. Cool. Well, Robbie, thank you for putting that on the thing. That was a good conversation.
Yes, that's why I put it on there. I thought it might speed up the movement towards the decision.
Should we talk about the allocation work you're doing?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like the reverse proxy and stuff.
Sure.
That may be of interest to people.
Yeah, actually, some of the background on the service account stuff I think would be interesting too.
Your talk now, or you have other topics to go through?
I think this is the end of the list. So
it's the end of the list.
Okay. So we recently added an allocator service that basically right now is acting as a reverse proxy. And we'll introduce a gRPC API. So instead of API server does API server extension for allocation does the allocation for us. This allocator service will do that. We think that it's going to improve the performance because it can scale independent of basically API server and controllers. Also, it helps with the cases that we have a matchmaker outside Kubernetes and need to make call into Kubernetes and authentication. Authentication happens with mutual TLS, mutual cert authentication. And we have a whitelist of certs that the allocator service accepts. What else? Yeah, so there are multiple steps for this task to complete. Right now, we have the reverse proxy in place.
So I think we should probably talk why we're doing this, right? So there's two use cases. One is so that the matchmaker completely outside of the cluster can talk to it, and it would not require any Kubernetes credentials, which in cluster are easy to get, but like outside is hard. But also for the hopping between the allocation services for
multi-cluster allocation for the allocation services to talk to other clusters, basically not having a single point of failure for the cluster entry.
If I remember correctly as well, I think we talked about this from the Kubernetes thing, from the service account credentials from outside in upcoming Kubernetes versions, those are going to get cycled a lot faster.
Yeah, that's the primary reason why we are basically doing this. Yeah.
So it kind of becomes untenable to maintain a service account credential from outside the cluster, or at least in upcoming versions. Because yay, I mean security good. Sorry, I think my son, were you going to say something? You came off mute. I don't know if I interrupted you.
No.
That's the end of the agenda items. I don't have anything else. Does anyone want to? Oh, sorry, April, you're going to say the same thing?
Yeah, I was gonna be like, did everybody go quiet, or is it just me? Is anything else that folks want to talk about, or should we call it for this time? Just if you missed it, I did put a link to request your T-shirt in the working doc. So I see some folks have already filled it out, but definitely fill that out and make your claim. I see all the anonymous animals highlighting the link now. I love all of our anonymous animals.
I'm looking through the issue backlog, and there's an interesting feature request from someone about a month ago about allowing game servers to run without ports because they want to use a bunch of proxies in front of their game servers. I don't know if that's a use case other people have run across, but I'm curious to learn more if anybody has tried doing that or is interested in doing that. It's issue 749. I don't think the person who wrote it is here.
Yeah,
we're losing the room here, so we have to disconnect. You guys.
Bye. Thanks for joining.
I saw that too. I thought that was also quite interesting.
Because one of the reasons we use the node IPs directly is to reduce latency, right? Like that's sort of done explicitly for higher performance. So I'm kind of curious what the use cases are for sort of explicitly saying we don't care about the higher performance. Like if there's a different class of games that's supporting, or how that would work.
Yeah, I mean, for us, yeah, we definitely want direct access to the port. So I can't think of other use case.
The only use case I can think of is in which you want to put some kind of proxy in front of the game server itself, and that's the thing you expose, and you want it to talk internally through the Kubernetes network to the pod directly inside the same cluster. Which could be a thing. There could be reasons to do that for like DDoS or some sort of crypto stuff or that kind of thing. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately. So you would still have direct access probably to your proxy, but not direct access directly to the game server itself. It's interesting. But there's probably a variety of models for that. I've been thinking a lot about proxies lately because it's been in my brain for some reason. Did that help, Robert?
Yeah, I was just curious if anybody else on the call is interested in this use case as well. If it's something that we should think more about and discuss, or if it's we should sort of poke this person and see if they can show up next month and maybe give us some more background, or put more info into the ticket, because it's a use case I hadn't really thought about as much because we were mostly focused on as much reduced latency as possible, right?
Yep. Interesting, they're specifically using WebSocket too, which is a whole other fun thing. And the conversations I've seen with pretty much anyone using WebSockets for games, and we've had a few of them in chat as well, is always a really fun one because you can't send a WebSocket to an IPM port because you need an HTTPS cert. And so you need to have some sort of DNS entry. And then how do you get your DNS entry to propagate to the IP port in time? I think the best solution we've seen in chat is running custom DNS servers, very much like if you've seen those DNS tunneling systems where you could plug the IP on the front with dots replaced with dashes or something, and then have that go to the thing. So you can wildcard cert it. And that seemed actually to work reasonably well from what I've seen. But if they want to route that through some sort of other either DDoS or auth gateway type thing, that's probably not unreasonable given that it's just WebSockets.
Yeah, I mean, you can use IPs without DNS names if you know how to trust the serving cert, right? Like the serving cert is not going to be a cert that's in a public,
Yeah, but if you're doing a web browser to the WebSocket connection.
Yes, if you're doing a web browser, it becomes an issue, right?
Yeah, which a lot of people, like if you're doing web games, which I've seen people want to do, that's a problem that has come up before. Yeah, it's a fun, tricky one. I have no objections with this. Like, we could probably just loosen the validation and say, like, yeah, if you want to do no ports, that's on you. That's fine. It's probably actually just a change in the CRD spec. I think it's just a min1. You could probably just make it 0 and it would be fine. But yeah, this is an interesting one. Was there anything else in here that I thought was pretty interesting?
I did want to call out just for folks to be aware that we're in the process of setting up a new GitHub organization for all of the Google gaming open source projects. And as part of that, Agones will migrate to the new org. And we will also then take advantage and split out into 3 repos. So there'll be a repo for the master branch, where the magic happens, and then we'll have a repo for community, and we'll have a repo for documentation. So it should basically, we'll get organized, and we'll also be able to take advantage of some of the GitHub tooling functionality around teams and things like that, put in some automation, and hopefully make everyone's lives a little bit easier. This should be pretty seamless to most folks. GitHub will, as part of the migration, do redirects, and your stars and watches and all that will just transfer over. But essentially, instead of going to the GCP GitHub org, you
can go now. It does exist. It's just very dormant at the moment. We haven't done the migrations yet, but that is coming soon. So just be aware. We'll send out full, update and notice when we are doing the migration, just so folks know. And then if there's any weirdness, we can address it. But fingers crossed, it should be a pretty seamless process.
April, you cut out, at least for me, when you were saying what the name of the new org was. I don't know if other people heard it.
It's Google for Games.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, if we're splitting things out into multiple repos, have we thought at all, maybe it's too premature, but about splitting like the SDKs for like different languages in different repos? Would that be useful, or is it nicer to keep them all kind of together?
That's an interesting question. I think there probably should be a good discussion about how we want to split things up before we split things up. And we can, once we've migrated, we can start some meta tagged stuff. I have opinions. I don't know where they are. Yeah, but I think there is interesting questions about whether SDK should be pulled out or kept the same.
Yeah, that would technically be a decision for the TSC. So you guys can discuss it, and we can kind of, as part of the migration process, we'll have the full idea of, how things get pulled out. And then we can look at what we want to create.
I think to date, usually, I'm just trying to think. Actually, that's not entirely true. I'm just thinking to date with this SDK, more of the new features have come through with each release. But that being said, like the new self-allocating, for example, was implemented in Go, and then someone just recently did it in Node. But what constitutes a release of an SDK? You could probably just get the SDK from the repo, which is what probably a lot of people are doing. And like that self-allocation hasn't propagated through to like C++ or Rust or some other things, just because no one's got to it yet. So maybe having their own self releases on individual SDKs. I don't know. There's probably lots of options there.
So we'll table that, but it's good.
It's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, a good thing to raise, Robbie, and we can kind of look at some other examples, maybe see what other folks have done, and if it's.
Yeah, I think generally there's like a tipping point where something becomes sort of self-sufficient, or you want a decoupled release cadence where you want to split it out. And I'm not sure we're there yet, but I think it's something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is like the build pipeline stuff that works now, and it all works for that repo, and it's fine. If we start splitting things out, then we have to build more build pipelines and all that kind of stuff, and there's more infrastructure, and we're not a pro yet, and all that kind of stuff. That too. Yeah.
Like at some point, it's worth it, and before that, it's probably not worth it, right? It's like easier to have sort of the single mono code repo and deal with one set of builds and releases and so forth, right?
Yeah.
I think, April, if you haven't already, can you create an issue so people that aren't here today or don't see the meeting notes or the recording know that this is coming?
Yeah.
That's a really good idea. Is there anyone else got any other stuff? I'm trying to look to see if there's any issues that also jumped at me.
Is anybody working on anything super cool that you want to share? Everybody's working on boring stuff.
I work on this project called Agones. It's not very exciting.
I don't think it's, I'm not sure it's going to, this whole Kubernetes thing is going to catch on.
I don't know. It's fine.
All right. Well, if nobody's got anything, we can wrap up a little early for today. I know the holiday is next week, and so a lot of folks have already started vacation or are just thinking about it. But I hope everybody has a good rest of the month, and we'll chat again in June. And of course, in the meantime, if you have anything that comes up or anything you want to discuss, do reach out, and you'll be hearing more about the org migration and all that good stuff soon too.
Great. Thanks, April.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.